Welcome to the HRIS Careers Podcast with your host, Troy Wallace, a podcast for human resources information systems professionals to help you elevate your HRIS career. We always say no one gets into HRIS on purpose, but it sure is interesting to find out how they did. We interview your HRIS peers to find out how they got tricked into the industry and what lessons and tools they use to progress their careers along the way. We discuss industry trends, AI, and even talk candidly about all the most popular HRIS platforms. Just think of it as the closest bar just outside the entrance of your favorite HR technology conference. Now you get it. Welcome in. Welcome to another Las Vegas version of the HRIS Careers Podcast. I am still in Las Vegas for the HR Technology Conference. I went to the IRM annual meeting last night, which was great, and the HR Technology Conference starts today. But I didn't want to wait to release this podcast with our guest, Greg Laney. He was the first person to comment on the YouTube channel, which we really appreciated. Certainly go out and check that out. Leave your own comment or subscribe. It's always appreciated. So once I saw it, I looked him up and I found out that he was the director of HR technology at Core Partners in Atlanta, Georgia. He's also a former adjunct professor at Georgia State University and, most interestingly, the author of Transforming HR, A Journey Through HRIS Implementation. He literally, as my kids would say, wrote the book on HRIS implementation. So he also has a YouTube channel called Streamline HR Solutions. He has a master's in industrial relations and even played a little football at the University of Alabama. Just a man of many talents, very knowledgeable and passionate about HR technology, and just a real joy to speak to. So we'll link everything in the show notes, his book, all the resources. Definitely listen to the lightning round. It should start around the 13-minute mark. We did a little bit early in this episode. We get into some deep Seinfeld cuts at the end of the podcast. Just fun, great stuff. Now, fair warning, we did have some issues with Greg being able to hear me, so I had to use the phone so he could hear my question. So his audio is great, but there are a few spots where my audio gets a little warbly, but the software did a good job of minimizing it, and it only lasts for a few seconds. So please enjoy this conversation with Greg Laney. Greg Laney, welcome to the HRIS Careers Podcast. We certainly appreciate you being here. Just like a real HRIS project, we've been troubleshooting some audio issues. So, folks, if you want to go over to the YouTube channel, you'll see the comedy of me talking into the phone to get the questions across to Greg. But we still certainly appreciate it. And thank goodness for the great software. We'll clean it up in the edit. But hey, Greg, I will have already done your intro. And so people have a basic background about, what you've been doing and, the book that you've recently written. But I'm going to give you the first couple minutes here, just kind of go over in general. Number one, I always think people have an interesting way they get into HRIS. Nobody gets here on purpose. If you could tell us how you got into HRIS in the first place, and then just a high level, what brought you to write your book?
Thanks, Troy. Well, watching some of your podcasts, it really resonated with me, the whole nobody gets into this on purpose. I had actually really started thinking about technology back in the early 2000s when I was working on a compensation role. I was involved in supporting the bonus calculation and then also the merit process for my organization. We were still doing everything in Excel spreadsheets. And in my first year with the organization, we did something and it took 3 people an entire month to calculate bonus calculations. So that was basically 3 people months to calculate that. And I was getting ready to set up for my second year, and the organization had pivoted a little bit and alignment had changed. And I had been thinking about it, and I talked to my manager and said, there has to be some way to automate this process. And so they asked me to put together a proposal. And at the time, I thought the answer might be, based on my limited knowledge, maybe using Microsoft Access. And so what they did was they knew that the answer was probably a little bit more widespread than what I was looking at, or maybe a little bit larger than what I was looking at. And so what they did was they paid an IT professional to come in for a half a day to talk to me about what my problem was and the solution I was trying to resolve. And this is in a compensation role, mind you. And so as we started talking about it, and I'd raised the concern about, well, maybe Access will help us with a database analysis and whatnot. They actually pitched to me a concept of something called VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications, within Excel.
Oh, yeah.
And so what they did was they taught me how to create macros and build upon those macros, and then edit the macros so that I could automate a lot of the analysis for a lot of our different locations, because each location got a different bonus payout and different people and different job profiles at those areas. And I did that. And it was actually a combination of using VBA and learning from that person. And then also I took a Microsoft Access class where I was able to do a database. And it was still kind of clunky. I went VBA, and then I did Access, and then I went back to VBA and I did the calculations. And, so from that first year where it took me, it took 3 of us 1 entire month to do this calculation. After I built this stuff up in the second year, by the third year, I could do all the spot checking and making sure the data was correct, all the files were proper and whatnot. And in about 4 hours, I could load everything up. I could hit the macros. I could go to lunch and come back. And then I had about a half hour worth of work left. So I took 3 months worth of work down to 1 month worth of work. And it was at that point that I knew, regardless of what part of HR I wanted to be in, that technology was going to be a large part of it.
Well, I find that interesting on a couple of different fronts. We're not going to talk about what our ages are, but let's say that we're in the same ballpark of age, and it always goes back to Microsoft Access, right?
Yes.
All of our first exposure to a database.
Absolutely.
And the good news is it really, at least for me, gave me like a basis and stuff I still use today. I didn't know it at the time, but it was like the nice little training wheels to kind of get you into understanding how that worked. But it looks like you found something where you're like, wow, it saved you a ton of time.
Right.
That's sort of pulling you in. So were you in a compensation role or HR related role right out of school, or how did that work out?
No, so I actually moved into that. I started out in college, and I'd switched. By the time I graduated college, my final major was psychology with a minor in German, and my psychology major, all of the classes, the elective classes that I could choose were IO psychology, industrial organizational psychology. And so I really liked the modifying, looking at the employee workplace and whatnot. Now, getting straight out of college, there's not that many jobs that are available for you if you don't know where to look in that particular area. So I took a job working for I worked as a recruiter for a large telecommunications company, and we hired sales and customer service people. And so for that year, until I went off to graduate school, I worked as a recruiter. And that's where I started my path. Now, for grad school, I did attend the University of Minnesota, where back then the program was called Industrial and Labor Relations, or Industrial Relations. There were only a few schools that had it: Minnesota, Cornell, and some of the other Big Ten schools. But it was a great program. That said, the internships that I worked were typically recruiter in nature or HR generalist in nature. And so my work background was very much recruiter and generalist. However, I was taking classes to get exposure to comp and ben, labor relations, HR systems, and whatnot. Now, once I graduated graduate school, I did again work as a generalist for a few years. And then I was fortunate enough to work for one company where they did have an opening that popped up in the compensation world. And I really did. We used something at that company called the Hay point factor system. And if you're familiar with Hay,
I remember.
It's a huge thing. And I really, really loved it. I helped with bonus calculation. I helped with merit processes, and I really liked the spreadsheet applications. So I enjoy that a lot more than the recruiting and the employee relations components, for sure. And that's ultimately what sucked me into the dark side, I guess, if you will, of human resources.
Well, you may call it the dark side, but it's also the well-paid side.
Yes.
I mean, I always tell anybody, if they're going to get an HR, go towards like the compensation piece or something of that nature, because number one, it's kind of hard. So not as many people want to do it. And, if you just look at salaries, HR and technology side has definitely treated me well over the course of my career. But if I was going to go anywhere else, it would be kind of in that compensation world. So I think a path well chosen.
Yeah, and there's also a higher barrier of entry. So once you get into it, that's the thing is I have friends that are recruiters and whatnot, and I've been a recruiter as well. And what I found was if I wanted to go from one recruiter job to another recruiter job, there were a lot of people that I had to compete against. Whereas in compensation or in HR systems, there's a far smaller talent pool that you have to compete against for sure. Not perfect, but it's smaller.
Absolutely. So I know we burned a little time doing our technology troubleshooting.
Right.
There's a couple things that I don't want to miss out on. And number one, I hate to miss out on the fun stuff. So I'm going to take you right into what we call the lightning round. We may do an abbreviated thing. So usually 3 to 5 questions. I call it the lightning round. I ask the questions rapidly, but your answers do not have to be rapid.
Okay.
All right.
Does AI Troy get to participate in this?
AI Troy doesn't tell me. He inspires me during the edit.
Okay.
And he will sometimes make an appearance.
Okay. I like that AI Troy. He's a good guy.
He's good. He's got all his facts in order, and I know he wants to replace me at some point.
I hear you.
Real Troy, are you getting the hint? Greg obviously wants me to do the lightning round.
All right, so we're going to put some fake time on the fake clock, and we are going to go to question number 1. If you could use only one HR analytics metric for the rest of your career, what would it be?
HR analytics metric. Okay, so there's a lot of metrics that could be used. Probably. So the one that sticks, they can all be inflated. And what's that quote? There are 3 types of lies, damn lies, and statistics. So totally understand that. And so this goes with a grain of salt. The one thing that I think that really sticks out for organization is quit terms. Someone that joins an organization and then leaves within the first year. And the reason for that is that plays to several different components of an organization. It plays to the recruiting component. Is the talent acquisition team doing the right job selling and marketing and branding the position in the company to bring the right people in? B, are they bringing the right people in? And then C, are the managers and the HR business partners doing the right thing to keep the talent that's brought in fully engaged? I mean, it's not a perfect analytic by any means, but if I had just one, that's probably one that I would keep as an option.
No, I like that one. And that's for coming right off the top of your tongue, because that's just right. It's a root of a lot of problems.
Right. Absolutely.
In an organization. All right, let's move on to question number 2. If you weren't in HR technology, what career do you think you'd be pursuing?
If I was not in HR technology, what career would I be pursuing? That's a good question. If HR technology didn't exist, then I probably would still be in compensation. Compensation, I like a lot of HR is the art and the science. And so I really like the science. I like the science component. Now, the interesting thing with compensation or total rewards, depending on what you call it in your particular organization, is compensation has a lot of science that's involved. You've got things like point factor systems. You've got market analysis, you've got creating market ranges, you've got salary surveys and whatnot. But there's also a little bit of art that's involved as well. So for example, one of the things that I don't know if it's tease my benefits colleagues about is, whereas benefits tends to be very black and white, and you have to follow the federal guidelines or the state guidelines on certain offerings. Within compensation, there's a lot of flexibility. So for example, if you have a salary range that you have to offer somebody $15 to $16 for the position an hour, but you knew you wanted somebody that was $17 an hour, you could do different things. You could offer things like a sign-on bonus. You can offer things like a retention bonus. You can look at bonus targets. You can look at a training stipend or even other benefits, stipends and whatnot as well. So compensation is an area that I really enjoy. Additionally, if I had to come up with a 1B, one of the things I got to do while working in HR systems, but to reflect on my compensation role, is I did get to act for 3 years, I did work as an adjunct professor in the evenings at a local 4-year university. I taught undergraduate and graduate level total reward systems. And now the money wasn't there for that, but it was just a bucket list item. And I really, really enjoyed working with the college students, teaching them compensation and total rewards. And that also led to a little bit of my YouTube channel stuff, shenanigans and whatnot.
Yeah, no, I noted that on your profile on LinkedIn, and I was like, oh, geez, this guy's done a little bit of everything. I would agree that I think the older I get, and I'm coaching, basketball, with
Right.
4th, 5th, 6th graders, and I'm finding that sort of activity much more rewarding than I would have thought.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I wouldn't have done it probably right out of school by any means. But as I got into it a little bit more, I really, really did enjoy it.
All right, let's go to question number 3. What is your go-to, we'll say your go-to or something you couldn't live without as far as a productivity tool that you use for managing day-to-day items or complex projects?
Okay. So, there's a lot of tools. So like when I was in the compensation world, Microsoft Access and VBA were my big pieces. And that was due to the compensation role. And if you go to salary school in YouTube, you'll see like a very ancient, probably 10-year-old by now, 15-year-old channel, where I've actually taken a few of my how-tos and tried to do videos on walking through how to leverage that technology for that. If we're to talk modern sense though, one of the things I've been doing, and the reason for changing from one organization to the other, is to look at moving into more strategic roles. I have a background that's very tied to really rolling on my sleeves and digging in. And one of the things I've tried to do is become much more strategic. And so I look at my weaknesses, and when I consider my weaknesses, probably the biggest weakness is sometimes I can ramble a little bit, or sometimes I can be a little more verbose. And so the process I used to use was I would write an email, for example, and then I would stick it away for about 4 hours, and then I'd go back to it, and then I'd red pen half the email, and then start over and clean it up. Now what I do is I use ChatGPT. I use AI, large language models, to basically write the key bullet points I want to say. I throw in a few prompts saying I want to sound professional and I want to sound like I'm non-confrontational. And I do that into the GPT. And then what it does is it spits out a draft of what a better sounding email response is. And so it's kind of a life hack that I use to improve my communication style, especially in the written format. I also use it from a presentation standpoint. If I'm doing a presentation on stuff, what I'll do is I'll load the notes into a GPT. I'll load it via PDF, for example, or at least the high level incident or high level information into the GPT with the key messagings. And then what I'd say is, help me focus on what my presentation needs to include. What do I need to talk about? What do I need to omit? And so it helps act as a presentation instructor, almost a Toastmaster instructor, if you will.
I definitely understand that, but we're going to move on because AI Troy is definitely going to intercede and have a big head when he hears that. He's definitely going to get involved in this episode at some point.
Please, real Troy, allow Greg to keep praising AI. He is absolutely my favorite guest so far, and so intelligent.
All right, let's go to number 4, which is going to be a good transition point.
Sure.
Because I want to spend a lot of time talking about your book. Which chapter of your book do you think was the hardest to write? Did anyone stick out in particular?
Yeah. So, I mean, the hardest to write are more the technical chapters. So you'll like, I have a chapter in the book on single sign-on. So let me step back. I originally tried to write a book. It was a bucket item list about 20 or so years ago, 22 years ago. I was in compensation world and I got about 60 pages in, and the book was it was very dry. It just wasn't really entertaining. And it really read as more of a frequently asked questions, where I had a lot of compensation questions I would ask. And then I would answer like, why did I only get a 3% merit, or a promotional increase instead of a 10%? Why did I this? Why did my manager not do that? And it, I wanted to make it useful, but, entertaining. And the useful, I was able to check the box on that, but I wasn't able to check the box on entertaining. I only got about 60 pages in. And at one point I realized it was probably, not salvageable. And so I paused that for a second. What I then did was I went on to other things. I created my own salary school, where I created tools that I sold, VBA code for Excel spreadsheets. I taught at Georgia State University. So I taught total rewards at a major university. And I also, with COVID, I did a YouTube channel. So over time, I decided, I've always had this goal, and I'm one that I'll pause a goal for sure, but I don't want to quit or totally give up on the goal. And so I said, technology, ironically enough, I'm working in technology, and technology has improved to the point where I have issues, I can get that particular help. So long-winded answer. So what I did was I started out by storyboarding the book. I identified, what went wrong with the original book. And the original book was more like it was a nonfiction, frequently asked questions, and it just wasn't entertaining. And so I said, maybe if I do a fictional book, maybe along the lines of like a Kenneth Blanchard, 1 Minute Manager, 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey, something like that. Maybe I can make something that's a little bit more entertaining. And so I endeavored down that path. And so as I wrote the book, I started out by storyboarding. You have to have a system that blows up. You have to have somebody that looks, that has egg on their face in front of the executive group. You have to have decisions that make. And the part I kind of skimmed over in the book was the RFP on how do we choose which system we want. I didn't want to focus so much on, okay, let's look at these 3 different systems. Let's look at the actual implementation of the system. Now, with regards to the chapters themselves, the hardest chapter to your question is, was I'd say probably was the single sign-on piece. And the reason why I say that is all the chapters, when I laid out all the chapters, I said, okay, what's involved with an HCM? And I like, okay, so you've got recruiting, you've got performance, you've got merit. And so I was able to lay out all these chapters. I then started looking at, well, what are the things that HRIS involves IT on that maybe we're not as in tune with. And so questions on things like integrations, making sure that we're using some of the same, some of the same testing modules or same testing models, making sure that our single sign-on was correct. And the single sign-on was the one area that I probably had the least amount of time with. So I'd say that the thing that probably kept me up at night or made me worry as I worked through it, and I had to double, triple, quadruple check it, was the single sign-on chapter for sure.
All right. So I do want to dig in a little bit, potentially if we have the time, on the RFP piece, choosing a implementation partner, and see if you have any horror stories to share. But first, I'm going to do a quick commercial for HRIS Careers. And number one, if you haven't followed on your favorite podcast player or you haven't gone over to the YouTube channel, Greg actually was one of the first guys to comment on the YouTube channel, which I really appreciated. And that led to this conversation. These are the kinds of conversations we want to have happen on the HRIS Careers podcast, HRIS person to HRIS person. So to the extent that you're willing to be on the show, certainly go to HRISCareers.com/podcast. And there's ways that you can get in touch with me if you want to be on the show. Number two, I want to talk about your book in particular, real specifically. So The book is called, and I just got it yesterday. You can get it on Kindle and on Amazon. We'll have all the links in the show notes for this. It's called Transforming HR, A Journey Through HRIS Implementation. So you're literally the guy who wrote the book on HRIS implementation.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And again, it goes back to it was a bucket list item that I did want to write a book. And so that was the driving factor. I figured I'd probably sell, one or, 2 or 3 books. My wife would buy a book, my mom would buy a book, and my dad would buy a book. And that would be the extent of it. But I could at least put on my LinkedIn profile that I wrote a book. I've actually, my LinkedIn network, and actually thanks to my technology bent with using social media tools. And again, I don't know the first thing about Instagram or TikTok or anything like that, but the tools that, to your point earlier about my age, LinkedIn and Facebook and stuff like that, I do have some familiarity with how to leverage LinkedIn and whatnot. I've been very successful in leveraging LinkedIn and actually making sales with my book. It was really a cathartic exercise, and truly sharing the experiences that I'd gone through about what you need to do to write a book. The other component too is I have had team members on my team that have started looking, that weren't really quite sure about, hey, I'm an individual contributor, but I'm thinking about becoming an HRIS manager or whatnot. What do I need to do? And, part of it was, just managing the process and making the decisions that I wanted to get them up to speed on. And I figured the book would be a great opportunity to give them some of the insights that I've shared, in face-to-face conversation, but give them at least a playbook on, some of the right ways to handle things. While there might not be a right or wrong answer for a particular issue, there might be a right or wrong way to go about resolving that issue.
And I think what I liked about it is, I think the book's about 130 pages. I'm going to call it just very digestible. You could probably get it through it in 2 or 3 sittings. And obviously, if you are someone newer to the HRIS industry, you're going to get a ton out of it, especially if you haven't actually been through a full-on implementation. You're going to get kind of the wireframes of all the pieces and what needs to be there, all the things you need to think about. But I also thought, even for your functional counterparts in HR that are going to be just on the periphery of a project, what a great read just to get everybody on the team understanding the basics of what this is going to look like. Because you didn't go into, you didn't just talk Workday, you didn't just talk SAP, you were more general, so everybody could digest it, regardless of the project.
Right. That was, so a few points on this was, I didn't want to exclude anybody, so from the standpoint of, I didn't want to make it Workday focused or SAP focused or ADP focused or Dayforce focused or whatnot. I wanted to make it very, very generic. And so I came, the old system dysfunction, I made the system names just fictional in nature because I didn't want to exclude anybody. I want people to be able to see that regardless of the system, it ties into the same thing. And one of the concepts I take into consideration when I'm hiring like HRIS analysts and whatnot, if I have a position that's for more of an entry level or a starting position for an HRIS analyst, I don't always look for somebody that has the SAP or the Workday or the whatnot experience. What I do rather is I look for someone that understands the concepts of, do I understand how a business process should flow? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? Can I figure out what fields make sense to build a proper report? Because a lot of people on the technology side, a lot of times one of the early problems that we all run into in the technology world is, we get a request for a report. And if we don't really nail them down on what do you want in that report, then you go back and forth 10 times with, oh, add this field, oh, add this field, oh, add this field, oh, add this field. And you have to figure out, well, how do I make sure that we capture everything at front and that we document the process without making it too bureaucratic? And so that's what I wanted to do with the book. The second thing I wanted to call out with the book is I had to make a decision when it was time to launch the book. And I think I launched it about early August. I think I probably accidentally launched the ebook a little sooner, but that was more to have some friends read it to get some reviews, and colleagues to get some reviews on there. But I originally, when I started putting everything together, again, everything was fictional. So what I then started doing is, okay, well, they're going to put together a project plan. Well, I need to at least start putting together a project plan to really think through this book. And part of me was thinking, you know what, I should have a bunch of appendices for the project plan, for the communication plan, for this, for that, and whatnot. And I had probably 10 or 12 different attachments that I could have added in. But then I had to go back and really think about, well, who's my audience for this? And, I don't want to make this, to the failure of my first attempt at a book. I didn't want to make it too technical in nature. But I have, rather I wanted to get people that were maybe college students that want to understand what HRIS is, or maybe an HRIS admin that wants to consider going into, work as an HRIS analyst for their organization and just wants some basic buzzwords to talk through some of the basic stuff. I think as you get further in, there's a lot of project management classes. You had a project management speaker last week online, in the conversation. There's a lot of systems training, some of the organizations, HCM organizations have like pro certifications you can take. And I think my book was not intended to answer those questions. Rather, my book was intended to at least get you into the conversation for those positions. And then if you decided to go further, to do so. And so for that reason, I decided not to include those components to my book. It made it a little cheaper because I didn't include those things. It made it less intensive for the proofreading because I didn't have to ensure that my project plan was as spot on as it needed to be for a fictional book. Now, that said, I have actually received LinkedIn emails from people, emails just asking, hey, can you assist me with this? Or can you help me walk through a communication plan? Or I'm trying to better understand this. And I have been like, I get excited about that because that means somebody's read my book.
Right.
So that's been, I'm not at the high level to where, I can be annoyed by it by any means. I'm at the, for the 4 people that have read my book, I'm excited to answer any questions, any and all questions on it. And so from that standpoint, it also sets up whatever I learned from the feedback from this book, I can incorporate into either book 2, book 3, or book 4 as we go down the road. And again, those would be probably more personal ventures, just because I like writing the book and less about making my retirement fund.
Right. Well, it's probably something when I saw your comment on the YouTube channel, I'm like, hey,
yeah,
somebody looked at that and they commented about AI Troy. So somebody went into the archive to listen to a couple of things. So it's definitely, even if, and I always say, if you can reach 5 or 10 people, I mean, that's kind of a big deal.
Absolutely. Even one person, if you can make, that's the thing is, everyone says if you can make the difference in one person's life, then, you've served your mission. And so I try to take that into consideration. And again, like, the YouTube channel, the book, everything I started really as a result of, hey, I suddenly have 10 hours less driving that I have to do because of COVID, so how can I reinvest that time? So maybe I'm not driving anymore. Maybe I'm giving back to the HR community. That's what my focus was there.
Now, one thing I didn't tell you is because I'm an entrepreneur at heart, I immediately went to try and reserve the URL peopletech.com. which was Greg's fictional implementation firm there, but unfortunately, somebody got it ahead of me. So it was already.
I hope it was a reader.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I know we have to get you out of here. So I want to dig in just real quickly and get real specific. So during implementations, HRIS implementations in general, I always feel like if people are going to use an implementation partner, that's really an integral piece. And I know in your book, you could have probably written a whole book just on that piece. Right. Is there anything from your, because you've done a lot of Workday implementations and I'm sure a lot of other
systems,
types of implementations. Any tips or your thoughts on selecting an integration partner, a short list of companies that you like, anything that might help people in that world?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few things with that. With my most recent place of employment, one of the key areas of focus, in my first 6 months was switching to a Workday support partner. And that was a huge, undertaking. So, one of the things to look at, because there's a lot of great companies out there that do it, but not every company is great for you and your situation. Some companies are better with larger organizations. Some companies are better with smaller organizations. If you're in a company that is business, 99% of its business in the US, and maybe you've got a few employees in Canada and Mexico, that's a different support partner than an organization that has offshore facilities in India and the Philippines and has 24/7 support. And so, um, and the reason why I bring that up is because, the offshore facilities and 24/7 support, all this stuff costs money, and you have to really look at what is the organization's budget. The other thing to look at really is, what is your organization trying to accomplish by the implementation of an HCM? I always joke with my colleagues about my experience in that, some of the people I love the most, but then some of the people that drive me the most crazy are the salespeople for some of these HCMs and for some of these other systems. They're supremely talented people, and they're brilliant at what they do. However, one of the challenges that I found is, a lot of times they'll come into a presentation with executives, and they'll have just pristine, sterile data, and they'll walk through the process of how the reporting works. They'll walk through the process of how succession planning works. They'll click 3 buttons, and everything will be resolved, and everything is a piece of cake. The reality for your organization is, your organization most likely doesn't keep data nearly as clean and pristine as that, as that HCM organization does for their demo models. Your job profiles aren't going to be nearly as clean. You're not going to have all the data that you need. That your market ranges aren't going to be as exact. Your compa ratio isn't going to be 0.97, for all your positions and whatnot. And so, it's not going to be as perfect. What you need to understand, as someone looking at an implementation partner and whatnot, is, what are in fact the needs of your business? What's the scope of the implementation going to be? And then look for a partner that specializes in those particular needs. There are some very small organizations that do wonders, that are magical. They're going to meet your price point and whatnot, and they're going to work great if you're a small organization, but they're not going to meet your call. If you've got HR business partners in 14 countries and you need someone 24/7. Likewise, other organizations may be overkill for what you're looking for. The other component to take into consideration when looking at vendors is really to negotiate and understand truly what you need. You're going to see that you've got a bucket list of maybe 14 things that they offer, but you only need 7 of those particular things. Maybe you can negotiate down some of their offering package to get a package that's a little bit better for you. You and I had talked, just in emails back and forth, about some of my, cost savings and whatnot. Well, some of those cost savings were real and realized. The other cost savings were, the very fact that a vendor had come back and said that the price for this project would be $48,000. And then after you walk through line item by line item, what the true scope of the project and what you're going to accomplish, maybe actually what you need to implement is only $14,000 in that situation. So right there, you save $34,000 just by not letting that vendor push their agenda on you, but you being an active participant in the making of that agenda.
That's a big one. And it's, I think, especially in the HRIS role, it's where you can make a big impact to your organization, because there are usually pretty large piles of money sloshing around for the implementation of a new HRIS system or project. And, little tweaks can help. And if I may editorialize, and you can tell me if you've got any firsthand experience with this, sometimes you will go into meetings with a consulting group, and boy, you better make sure that the consultants that are sitting in front of you at the table during the negotiations are the one that are actually going to show up for your project on day one. Because, unfortunately, I call it the kind of bait and switch that will happen. And, vetting those, because at the end of the day, you can have really a 5-star consulting firm, and even a 5-star consulting firm might have 1 or 2 clunkers, in the consulting.
That's actually, I've experienced that live when we're implementing Workday in one situation, where they did have people that have been in HRIS for 20 plus years. And then you had, when they brought in the consultants were, a couple of years out of college. They had received their implementer status. And they had one or two clients before you, which was okay. But the challenge that I found, in one of my, key talking points as I talk about this was that you said, what's the best practice that we need to consider? And they could say, well, what we did at the last place was we did this. And you say, but if we can't do that as a best practice for us, what's another best practice? And at which point they wouldn't know. They can go back to the manual and say, okay, page 2 through page 10 say this is how you can implement this into the system, but they don't have that experience. I think there's something to be said for, and I truly, truly appreciate when I have an implementer that says, I've been doing this for 20 years and the textbook way options are 1, 2, and 3, but there's some other solutions that are also available that I've seen that have been successful as well. I think that answer from a consultant is worth its weight in gold for sure.
Yes. And I by no means, because the HRIS Careers platform is to help people from the beginners to the seasoned veteran, to be helpful in that journey. And there needs to be a place where people, you got to start somewhere.
Right. Absolutely.
But, I think the good consulting firms have a system to do that where they will give you a junior person and a senior person with the understanding that the junior person is going to shadow, learn, be an extra pair of hands. But you've got that better decision-making ability in the senior person.
As long as you have access to that makes it a lot better. I found that the best implementations were where you had the people that really, really understood the system. Oftentimes that they may have experienced it as a customer and as a consultant as well. That typically makes it a lot. It helps me sleep better at night for sure.
No, yeah, and I would say, that's so I spent, I would say 2/3 of my career on the consulting side.
Right.
And I wish there was a program to go in and flip yourself to the other side for a year, then come back and consult for 2, flip yourself to the other side.
Right, exactly.
Being on both sides of the table is definitely useful as a consultant.
Absolutely. And that's that challenge. I think a lot of companies have great programs like rotational programs and whatnot. I know it's probably not realistic, but that would be a fantastic, you have like things like Red Cross or whatnot, where you can take 6 months and work for the, for the charity and whatnot, paid for by your company. That would be great if they had that in the consulting world and with clients. It may be a pipe dream, but I absolutely could see that. But that's probably the biggest challenge I have with early on consultants is that they're just not as familiar with it. Now, I think that said, over time they get that experience, and it's just part of the lumps you take with it. But for you as the customer, it's important for you to, that's one of those things where you sit there and you might say, "Oh, that's not my problem. I just need to come up with a solution." And if you can find the consulting company that recognizes that the junior consultant may not have all the solutions, but then they have a resource that gets you there, then that makes up for sure.
Oh, absolutely. So I know we have to get you out of here. Before you go, I'm not going to say AI because that's been beaten to death. It can be AI, but what are you seeing, even in your organization right now, at core partners, what are the 1 or 2 things that keep you up at night or that you're worried about, or even maybe opportunities that you see in HRIS the next couple of years?
Yeah. Okay. So, there's a few areas. I think whether it's core partners, whether it's, any company, I think the biggest challenges right now, one of the biggest improvements in system HCMs and whatnot is we're getting a lot better at the silo component. And one of my stories or anecdotes that I share with people was I had an executive probably about 15 years ago where they asked me, we want to know where our high performers are coming from. So, that seems like an easy enough request. Where do we recruit our high performers from? Now, the reality at that particular time was you had a recruiting tool, you had like an HCM, or you had an HR system, and then you had a performance review tool, and none of those tools fall. And to talk in more of a techie term, because those systems were by three different vendors, you didn't have, let's say, a primary key. And so then you had to figure out, well, how do I join this particular data? Is William Smith the same person as Billy Smith, is the same person as Bill Smith? And, and so then you had to come up with, okay, do I make translate tables, and whatnot. That said, the silo factor has improved substantially, and I think we're a lot better than where we were. What some of the issues are going forward are, I think recruiting is always going to be a big challenge. It's kind of like law enforcement, where they build a radar gun, and then they build a better radar detector, and then they build a better radar gun and a better, it's the same concept with recruiting. They've got AI and technology that helps filter out candidates. So instead of reading 500 resumes for a position that you posted, maybe you're only reading 70 resumes, but you're filtering out a lot of the good people as well, and the technology is improving. From a standpoint of writing resumes, you've got a lot of AI focused resume writing tools and whatnot that help with a lot of that stuff. But then also it helps create fraudulent stuff. So then how does the employer verify that particular information? And then of course, finding the candidates, not just the staffing, but also the recruiting component of how do you find all the right candidates for those particular organizations? I think LinkedIn and a lot of the organizations do a good job of locking down that information. So that helps keep the value or the importance of like recruiters or headhunters for their role and their ability to go in and into organizations and dissect them and figure out where the talent lies, and then figure out who they need to talk to. But I think that's an area where technology is going to continue to improve. And I'm not at Workday Rising this week, but one of the things I saw Josh Burson post was they had a big announcement on Workday Illuminate. Illuminate is using the LLMs, the large language models, or AI to improve on some of the stuff that Workday does. And I think SAP uses this, and ADP uses this type of functionality as well. They've always had chat bots that have always answered some very basic questions. I want to request a day off or whatnot, but they're starting to take that to the next level to make these tools more intuitive. Because what I've found within organizations, in conversations with executives, is we're paying a lot of money for these tools, and it's I want to go down my Seinfeld reference of the tip calculator back when they had PDAs. Jerry gave his dad a PDA, which does all these great things, keeps calendars, phone numbers, and whatnot. But his dad only uses it as a tip calculator.
Hey, Morty, what's wrong with these tip calculators?
What are you talking about?
It's over tipping. I just left $5 for a BLT.
Well, Workday and these other systems, if the HR team sees that you can do all these thousands of great things, but the executives see that all you can do is approve time off and maybe increase compensation, then they see it as really just a one or two point tool. However, using the AI in these particular instances and the technology in these instances, it's going to make these tools a lot more intuitive. So then an executive can say, I have a presentation on my team and I need to address headcount concerns, or I need to address turnover concerns, or I need to address performance concerns, or we're not hitting our numbers. Please help identify, the strongest performers, just by having natural language conversations with the technology and it coming back with reasonable answers. I think the technology is going to improve business a lot. And in the value or the bang for the buck that you get from these solutions is actually really, really impressive, because I've played around with it on a personal level and on a professional level. And it's just so cool what you can do. Just playing with it on your own. If you're willing to dabble in it, you'll get a lot of great experience for sure.
Yeah. So I don't know when this podcast will come out exactly, but I'm going to the HR Technology Conference next week.
That's a good conference too.
So I'll be interested to see what's popping up here. And we'll get you out with this. Now, this is useless information that fills my brain.
Okay.
I actually know that tip calculator.
Right.
They thought they were getting the Wizard, but evidently it was actually the Willard.
Willard.
This isn't a wizard, it's a Willard.
A Willard? Sacramento Senior screwed me.
That's right. This is right. You remember that one? Yes. Yeah. Where did you get the? He said he got it for like I forget what it was, but it was like $100, and he said he got it for $10 or it was $1,000. They got it for $100. So he's like, "Oh, get 100. I'm going to buy them for the board because they're so cheap." And he's like, "I can't afford that." But yeah.
Jerry, why didn't you get them wizards?
The real wizard's $200.
You didn't have a deal?
No deal. Not hot.
I can't remember to take out the trash, but I can remember that.
Hey, Morty, what's wrong with these tip calculators?
What are you talking about?
It's over tipping. I just left $5 for a BLT.
Let me see that. This isn't a wizard, it's a Willard.
A Willard? Sacramento Senior screwed me.
Mine doesn't have a 7. I'm ruined. Jerry, why didn't you get them wizards?
The real wizard's $200.
You didn't have a deal?
No deal. Not hot.
Morty, you and Kramer, you're finished.
What?
Everyone vote for the guy in the wheelchair.
The people have spoken.
Seinfeld's got a lot of great obscure references for people that are in my demographic, I guess, or age group.
Absolutely.
For sure.
All right, Greg. Well, I'd love to have you come back, and maybe we're going to do some panels that you would be willing to come
Sure.
back on with some groups. This has been great. Number one, I'm so happy that you took the time to make the comment on the YouTube channels. That's I really do appreciate that. Now, where are the best places for? I know you're the book is on Amazon.
At Amazon.
And I didn't have any problem finding it. It's either search Greg Laney, Laney, or it's the name of it's Transforming HR, A Journey Through HRIS Implementation. Believe it or not, there are not a lot of HRIS related books.
That's another
on
reason to write a book.
Yes. So where else could people reach out to you if they want to get in contact with you?
Okay, so I during COVID, I started a YouTube channel called Streamline HR Solutions. I've slowed down on the video making for that just because as offices open up again, I have less time to make videos. But I still do have a lot of information that's there, and I probably will go back to making some videos. It is a passion. I will go back there as well. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. Greg Laney, Laney is my name. I'm open to connect with pretty much anyone, as long as you're not a bot. Sorry, AI Troy, but as long as you're not a bot, I'm willing to connect with you and share information. I again, I think the sum of HR is more than any one of us. So I'm always glad to participate where I can. If I can't help you, then maybe I can point you in the direction of someone that can.
Oh, excellent. Hey, we really appreciate it. Like I said, I've started the book and I've enjoyed what I've read so far. So for the HRIS Careers community, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Mine doesn't have a 7.
Here we go.